The pen scratched across the paper like something final dying. I watched from across the conference table as my wife of 11 years signed the last document with a flourish that seemed almost theatrical. She turned to her attorney and shared a look of quiet triumph before setting the pen down with deliberate care. Well, that was less painful than I expected. Her voice carried that particular tone I had learned to recognize over the years. The one that sounded pleasant while cutting deep. The mediator glanced between us with professional neutrality. But I caught the slight downturn of her mouth when Vivian spoke. Raymond. Vivian addressed me directly for the first time that morning. I hope you understand this is better for both of us. You can focus on your projects without feeling pressured to be something you are not. Her attorney suppressed a smile. I kept my hands flat on the table, fighting the urge to close them into fists. 11 years. 3 career changes at her insistence. 2 moves across the country for her promotions. And now she sat there in her designer blazer telling me I was the one who could not keep up. Your father would have wanted you to be realistic about your limitations. Some people are meant to build empires. Others are meant to support them. Welcome back to another powerful story, my beloved listeners. Kindly tell where you are watching from and what time it is where you are at. If you are new here, prepare for a story of betrayal, unexpected love, and what truly makes a family. Drop everything and listen closely. This tale of heartbreak and redemption might just change how you view love and family forever. The mention of my father hit somewhere deep. He had passed 4 years ago, still running his small watch repair shop downtown, still wearing the same worn cardigan he had owned for decades. Vivian had always viewed him with thinly veiled condescension. A man who had never aspired to more than his little corner storefront, she once said at a dinner party while I sat silent beside her. The mediator cleared her throat. The settlement seems clear. Mr. Harlow receives the workshop property, which carries significant debt, the older vehicle, and monthly support payments of $800 for 18 months. Mrs. Harlow retains the primary residence, investment accounts, and business assets. It sounded almost reasonable when listed that way. What it did not capture was how I had given up my teaching position when Vivian said we needed to relocate for her career. How I had used my inheritance from my mother to fund her first business venture. How she had convinced me to put everything in joint accounts because that is what partners do, then systematically transferred funds to accounts I did not know existed. Any final statements? The mediator looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. Vivian glanced toward the back of the room where I knew someone was waiting. I did not turn to look. I did not need to see the man she had been seeing for the past year. The venture capital partner who found my wife's ambition so much more attractive than my quiet creativity. I think we have said everything that needs saying. Vivian smiled. Then quieter, meant only for me but clearly audible to everyone. You know, Raymond, I genuinely hope this gives you the freedom to figure out who you are. Maybe without the pressure of our life together you will finally finish one of those furniture pieces you have been working on for 3 years. The words landed exactly where she intended them to land. I could have said something. Could have reminded her that I had given up a tenure-track position at a respected college because she said she needed a partner willing to be flexible. Could have pointed out that my furniture work had been interrupted repeatedly by her demands that I help with her business launches, her client events, her networking dinners where I stood in corners holding drinks for people who looked through me. But I had learned long ago that arguing with Vivian only provided her more ammunition. So I remained silent, and she interpreted that silence as victory. What she did not know, what no one in that room knew, was that I had spent the previous week going through boxes in the storage unit my father had left me. Boxes I had never opened because the grief had been too fresh, then too complicated, then too tangled with the demands of a marriage that left no room for my own history. What I had found there had changed everything. The conference room had large windows that let in the morning light. Outside, the city continued its ordinary business. Cars passed. People walked to appointments. The world did not pause to acknowledge that 11 years of my life were being reduced to a stack of papers and a list of assets that barely added up to survival. Vivian stood, smoothing her skirt with manicured hands. She extended her hand to her attorney, a sharp-featured man named Preston Gale whose hourly rate probably exceeded my monthly income. Thank you, Preston. This has been handled beautifully. My pleasure, Vivian. He gathered his papers with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. I will have the final documents sent to your office by end of week. My own attorney, A recently graduated lawyer named David Bowman, who had taken my case through a legal aid referral, shuffled his thin folder of papers nervously beside me. He had warned me this would not go well. Vivian had resources, connections, a narrative she had been building for months about the struggling artist husband who could not provide the life she deserved. Mr. Harlow. The mediator addressed me directly. Do you have any questions about the terms? No. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Flat and distant. No questions. Vivian paused at the door, turning back with an expression that might have looked like concern to anyone who did not know her. Take care of yourself, Raymond. I mean that sincerely. Then she was gone. Through the glass partition of the conference room, I watched her walk to where Marcus Webb was waiting. He stood when he saw her, adjusting his expensive cuffs, opening his arms to receive her. She melted into him with a familiarity that suggested this was not new. This had been going on for a very long time. Mr. Harlow. David Bowman touched my elbow gently. We should go. I nodded but did not move immediately. Instead, I watched Vivian and Marcus walk toward the elevator together. She was laughing at something he said. Her whole body language had changed. Lighter. Freer. As if the weight she had been carrying was the weight of being married to me. I am sorry, David said quietly. I know this is not the outcome we hoped for. Hope. I almost laughed at the word. Hope had left this marriage long before I discovered the affair. Hope had packed its bags around the same time I realized that every conversation with my wife left me feeling smaller than the one before. It is fine, David. Thank you for your help. I gathered my copy of the settlement papers and walked out of the conference room alone. The parking lot was bright with midday sun. My car sat at the far end, an 11-year-old sedan that needed new brakes and probably a new transmission before long. Vivian had taken the newer car months ago, along with most of the furniture and all of the confidence I had once possessed. I sat behind the wheel for several minutes without starting the engine. Through the windshield, I could see the courthouse across the street where our divorce would be finalized in a formal hearing next month. Just a formality now. Everything important had already been decided in that conference room. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my sister Catherine. How did it go? I stared at the message for a long moment before typing my response. About how you would expect. 3 dots appeared as she typed her reply. Come for dinner tonight. You should not be alone. I will think about it. But I knew I would not go. Catherine meant well, but she had never liked Vivian and would spend the entire evening reminding me of every warning sign I had ignored. I was not ready to hear how right everyone had been about the woman I had loved. Instead, I started the car and drove toward the edge of town. Toward a storage facility I had not visited in 3 years. Toward boxes I had been avoiding since the day my father died. The grief had been too much at first. Then Vivian had made it clear she did not want what she called that old man's clutter in their home. So I had packed everything hastily during a weekend when she was traveling for work and stored it away where I would not have to think about it. Now I needed to think about it. Because somewhere in those boxes was something that might change everything. The storage facility was a low concrete building on an industrial street at the edge of the city. Unit 147. I had been paying the monthly fee automatically for years, another detail Vivian would have criticized if she had known. Wasting money on sentiment, she would have said. I unlocked the padlock with the key I had been carrying in my wallet since my father's death. The metal door rolled up with a grinding sound and I was hit immediately with the smell of dust and memory. The unit was small. Perhaps 10 feet by 10 feet. Packed with boxes I had labeled hastily in black marker during that terrible weekend 4 years ago. Kitchen items. Books. Tools. Personal papers. I stepped inside and pulled the cord that turned on the single bare light bulb overhead. The fluorescent glow made everything look slightly unreal. Like I was standing in someone else's memories rather than my own. My father's name had been Edward Harlow. He had run the watch repair shop on Main Street for 43 years. The same shop his own father had started in 1942. 3 generations of Harlows had worked in that cramped space filled with tiny tools and magnifying lenses and the constant quiet ticking of mechanisms being brought back to life. I remembered the smell of machine oil. The way my father's hands moved with such precision over gears smaller than rice grains. The patience he had for work that most people would find impossibly tedious. Every mechanism deserves attention, he used to tell me. Every small thing matters, Raymond. The world is built from small things done properly. Vivian had never understood him. To her, he was an embarrassment. A father-in-law who wore patch sweaters and drove a 15-year-old sedan when he could have been something more impressive. She tolerated his presence at holiday dinners with barely concealed impatience and changed the subject whenever anyone asked about his work. I began opening boxes. The first contained kitchen items from his apartment. Mismatched plates and cups that had accumulated over decades of simple meals eaten alone after my mother died. I set it aside. The second box held books. Philosophy and history mostly. My father had been a voracious reader, though he never talked about it much. I ran my fingers over the worn spines and felt the ache of missing him. The third box was labeled personal papers, and this was the one I had been avoiding. This was the one that had sent me driving out here in the middle of a Tuesday after watching my wife sign away our marriage without a flicker of remorse. I lifted the lid and began to sort through the contents. At first it was what I expected. Old tax returns. Insurance documents. The deed to the watch shop building. Letters from customers thanking him for repairs that had saved family heirlooms. But then I found a folder I did not recognize. It was thick brown leather, tied closed with a cord. The leather was worn smooth with age, as if it had been handled many times. On the front, in my father's careful handwriting, was a single word. Raymond. My hands trembled slightly as I untied the cord and opened the folder. The first document was a property deed. I read it twice before the words began to make sense. It was for a commercial building on Harbor Road. A building I did not know my father owned. The purchase date was 1987. Behind it was another deed. A different building on Industrial Way. Purchased in 1992. Behind that, another. And another. And another. I sat down hard on the concrete floor of the storage unit, papers spreading around me like fallen leaves. 4 commercial buildings in the downtown district. Partnership certificates for something called Crawford Development Consortium. Bank statements showing account balances that made my vision blur. This could not be right. My father had been a watchmaker. A simple man in a small shop. He had worn the same cardigan for 20 years and driven a car that should have been retired a decade before he was. He had lived in a modest apartment and eaten simple meals and never once mentioned anything about property or investments or accounts with 6 figures before the decimal point. I picked up the bank statements again and read them more carefully this time. Regular deposits going back decades. Some from rent payments. Some from something called Crawford Distribution. Some from sources I could not identify. The total in the most recent statement was $783,000. And that was just one account. At the bottom of the folder was an envelope. Thick and heavy, sealed with wax that bore the impression of a pocket watch. My father's personal seal that he used for important correspondence. On the front, again in his careful handwriting, were the words, "For Raymond, when you need it most." I broke the seal with hands that would not stop shaking. Inside was a letter. My son. If you are reading this, it means you finally got curious about the old man's papers. I always wondered how long it would take. I know this will come as a shock, sweetheart. Your old dad was not quite as simple as he seemed. Those weekend meetings and business trips were not just small-time hustles. Over the years I built something real. Something substantial. But I want you to understand why I kept it from you. I grew up poor, Raymond. You know that. What you do not know is how I watched money change people. Watched it corrupt their values and destroy their relationships and make them forget what really mattered. I also saw how knowledge of family wealth could make young people complacent. Less motivated to develop their own skills and character. I wanted you to become the person you were meant to be based on your own talents and drive. Not because you knew there was money waiting for you. I wanted you to choose your wife for love, not financial security. I wanted you to pursue your dreams because they mattered to you, not because you had the luxury of a safety net. I paused reading, my throat tight. He had watched me struggle. Watched me give up my teaching position. Watched me pour my mother's small inheritance into Vivian's business. And he had said nothing because he wanted me to build my own character. The letter continued. By now you are probably wondering why I stayed in that little apartment and kept working as a janitor when I had all these business interests. I stopped reading. Janitor. But my father had not been a janitor. He had run the watch repair shop. Then I remembered. After my mother died, my father had taken a second job. Night shift work at a big office complex downtown to help pay off medical bills. I had assumed he stopped after a few years, but he had never actually said so. I had just stopped asking. The truth is, I loved that job. It kept me grounded. Reminded me every day what real work looked like. And it was the perfect cover for my business activities. Nobody expects a night janitor to be closing million-dollar real estate deals. People think janitors are invisible, so they talk freely around us. I probably knew more about the local business community than most CEOs. I read that paragraph 3 times. My father had used his janitor job as intelligence gathering. Cleaning offices at night while listening to conversations that revealed which companies were struggling, which were expanding, which properties might come available, which business leaders were trustworthy. He had built an empire while everyone thought he was emptying trash cans. The letter went on to describe his business philosophy. How he had started with small investments in properties no one else wanted. How he had found partners who valued discretion as much as he did. How he had grown his portfolio slowly and carefully over decades, never drawing attention, never changing his lifestyle, never letting the money change who he was. But the part that made me put the letter down and stare at the concrete wall was near the end. I have watched your marriage, Raymond. Watched more carefully than you knew. I have seen how she speaks to you when she thinks no one important is listening. I have seen you shrink over the years. Your voice getting quieter. Your projects gathering dust. I hoped I was wrong about her. But I made arrangements just in case. My attorney, a man named Walter Fennick, has been holding documents until you came looking for them. He will explain the rest. But I want you to know that I saw who she really was long before you did. And I loved you enough to prepare for the moment when you would need protection. You were always my greatest hope, son. Not because of what you might achieve, but because of who you are. Do not let anyone convince you that kindness is weakness. Your father. I do not know how long I sat on that concrete floor. The light had changed when I finally became aware of my surroundings again. The afternoon sun slanting through the gap under the storage unit door cast long shadows across the scattered papers. My father had been secretly wealthy for my entire adult life. He had watched my marriage deteriorate. He had seen Vivian for who she really was. And he had prepared a safety net that he never told me about because he wanted me to find my own strength first. I gathered the documents carefully, replacing them in the leather folder. There were more boxes to go through. More answers to find. But first I needed to contact Walter Fennick. The name was familiar. I had met him once, briefly, at my father's funeral. A distinguished older man who had shaken my hand and said something about being sorry for my loss. I had assumed he was just another customer, someone whose watch my father had repaired decades ago. Now I understood that he had been something much more important. I locked the storage unit and drove home in a daze. My apartment was small and sparsely furnished. Most of our possessions had gone with Vivian to the house we used to share. I did not mind. I had never really felt like those things belonged to me anyway. I found Walter Fennick's contact information through a simple internet search. His law firm was in the financial district. The website showed a distinguished building and a list of attorneys with impressive credentials. Walter Fennick was listed as Senior Partner Emeritus, specializing in estate planning and business law. My hands were steadier now as I dialed the number. Fennick and Associates, how may I direct your call? My name is Raymond Harlow. I need to speak with Walter Fennick. It is regarding my father's estate. Edward Harlow. There was a brief pause on the line. Mr. Harlow. Please hold for just a moment. The hold music was classical. Brahms, I thought. My father had loved Brahms. Less than a minute later a deep voice came on the line. Raymond. I have been waiting for your call for quite some time. Mr. Fennick. I found my father's documents. In his storage unit. I know. He told me you would eventually. He just was not sure when. I need to understand what is happening. My father was a watchmaker. He worked as a janitor. How is any of this possible? Walter Fennick's voice was warm with something that sounded like genuine affection. Your father was one of the most remarkable men I have ever known. And I have known a great many men in my 50 years of practice. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? I think it is better if we discuss this in person. Yes. Yes, I can do that. Good. 10 o'clock. My assistant will send you the address, though I suspect you have already found it. I have. Your father would have expected nothing less. He always said you were smarter than you gave yourself credit for. See you tomorrow, Raymond. The line went dead. I sat in my small apartment as the evening shadows lengthened, holding my father's letter and trying to reconcile the man I thought I knew with the man these documents revealed him to be. He had owned buildings. He had formed partnerships with successful businessmen. He had accumulated wealth that most people would consider substantial. And he had done all of it while wearing patched sweaters and driving an old sedan and fixing watches in a shop that smelled of machine oil and quiet dedication. Why? The letter had explained his philosophy about money and character. But there was something else. Something in the way he wrote about watching my marriage. About seeing Vivian for who she really was. I pulled out my phone and scrolled back through old messages. There were conversations with my father from years ago. Brief exchanges because he had never been comfortable with texting. One caught my eye. From 3 years before he died. How is everything, son? Good, Dad. Busy. Vivian's new project is taking a lot of time. His response had been simple. Make sure you take care of yourself too. You matter. At the time I had thought it was just my father being my father. Concerned but not wanting to interfere. Now I read it differently. He had been watching. He had been worried. And he had been preparing. I did not sleep that night. Instead I went through every document in the leather folder, making notes, creating timelines, trying to understand the scope of what my father had built. 4 commercial properties. One of them, I realized with a jolt, was the building that housed Vivian's main office. My father had been my wife's landlord. She had been paying rent to his estate for 3 years. She had mocked his memory just hours ago, called him a man who never aspired to more than his little corner storefront. And all this time she had been conducting her business in a building he owned. The irony was so sharp I almost laughed. By morning I had a clearer picture. My father had started investing in real estate in the 1980s, using the knowledge he gained from his night janitor job and his watch repair customers. He had partnered with a man named Thomas Crawford, a developer who valued discretion and long-term thinking. Together they had built a portfolio of commercial properties throughout the downtown district. The watch shop had never been my father's primary source of income. It had been his cover. His reason for being downtown, for knowing everyone, for having access to information that others overlooked. He had been hiding in plain sight for 40 years. Walter Fenwick's office was on the 17th floor of a building that looked like it had been there since the 1920s. Brass fixtures and marble floors and the kind of quiet elegance that spoke of old money and established reputations. The receptionist showed me to a corner office with tall windows overlooking the city. Walter Fenwick rose to greet me, extending a firm hand despite his 70-plus years. Raymond. You look like your father. I have been told that. Sit, please. We have quite a bit to discuss. He poured coffee from a silver carafe on his desk and handed me a cup before settling into his own chair. Your father and I met in 1976. He came to me to set up a simple trust for you after your mother was diagnosed. He wanted to make sure you would be taken care of if anything happened to them. I remember that time vaguely. I had been young. My mother had been sick but had recovered. Over the years our relationship evolved. Your father had a remarkable mind for business. He saw opportunities that others missed. He understood people in ways that gave him advantages in negotiations. And he was patient. More patient than any investor I have ever known. Walter opened a file on his desk and began removing documents. By the time of his death, your father's estate was valued at approximately $3.8 million. Commercial real estate, investment accounts, partnership interests, and liquid assets. All of it held in a trust with you as the sole beneficiary. I stared at the number on the page. 3.8 million. Why did he not tell me? Because he wanted you to become yourself first. He watched you grow up, saw you become a teacher, saw you find work that mattered to you. He was proud of that, Raymond. Proud that you chose meaning over money even though you did not know there was money to choose from. Walter paused, his expression growing more serious. But he was also concerned. particularly in the last years of his life. He asked me to investigate certain matters. I hope you will forgive the intrusion. He slid a second file across the desk. It was thicker than the first. Investigate what? Your wife's business practices. Your marital finances. Certain patterns he had observed that worried him. I opened the file with hands that trembled slightly. The first page was a summary. Offshore accounts in Vivian's name alone. Commingled business and personal funds. Systematic transfer of marital assets to hidden vehicles. Evidence of inflated valuations to attract investors. Documentation of undisclosed income for tax purposes. She has been planning to leave you for at least 2 years, Walter said quietly. Positioning assets. Building narratives. Preparing to divorce you while ensuring you would have no resources to fight back. I turned pages. Bank transfers. Business registrations in jurisdictions known for opacity. Email exchanges that Walter's investigators had obtained through legal means. One email thread was between Vivian and her attorney, Preston Gale, from 18 months ago. He has no idea what he is entitled to, she had written. And my lawyer says we can probably settle for less than 20% of actual assets. He will take whatever I offer because he does not have the resources to fight it. Another email, this one to Marcus Webb. Poor Raymond. Maybe this will teach him not to marry above his station. Some people are just meant to be followers, not partners. I closed the file. She called my father a man without ambition. Just hours ago. In the mediation. I know. Walter's voice was gentle. Your father anticipated this might happen. He asked me to hold these documents until you came seeking them, which would mean you had recognized something was wrong. The scope of what I was learning was almost too much to process. My father had watched my marriage from the outside, seen the manipulation I was too close to recognize, and built a protective structure that would only activate when I was ready to use it. There is more, Walter said. Regarding the building at 77 Downtown Plaza. Vivian's office building. Yes. Your father purchased it in 2015 specifically because her company was looking to lease there. He wanted to keep an eye on her operations. The rent payments have been deposited into an account in your name ever since. My father had been watching Vivian for years, documenting her behavior, preparing evidence that could be used if needed. He loved you very much, Raymond. He told me once that his greatest fear was not death but leaving you unprotected against someone who did not value you. I thought of all the times I had defended Vivian to my father. All the times I had made excuses for her dismissiveness, her criticism, her barely concealed contempt for him and for me. And all along he had been quietly building the case that would prove everything I was too blind to see. What happens now? I asked. Now, Walter said, we need to discuss your divorce proceedings. I understand the mediation produced a settlement that was significantly unfavorable to you. She is keeping almost everything. The house, the investments, her business. I get the workshop and $800 a month. That settlement was based on incomplete information. Specifically, it did not account for your inherited assets or for the evidence that your wife concealed marital property during discovery. Walter pulled out another document. This is a motion to reopen the asset division based on newly discovered evidence. We can present your inheritance as information that materially affects the settlement. We can also introduce evidence of your wife's concealed accounts and fraudulent representations. She will fight it. Yes. But she will lose. The documentation is comprehensive. Your father made sure of that. He mentioned criminal charges in the letter. Tax issues. Fraud. Those are possibilities. Yes. Concealing assets during divorce proceedings is fraud. Understating income for tax purposes is criminal. But those are separate matters. For now, our focus should be on ensuring you receive a fair settlement in the divorce. I sat with that for a long moment. Fair. What would fair even look like after 11 years of being diminished? There is one more thing, Walter said. He reached into his desk drawer and withdrew an envelope. Your father wrote this for me to give you when we met. He wanted you to have his own words when you faced this situation. I took the envelope. It was addressed in my father's handwriting. For Raymond, when he begins to fight back. I opened it and began to read. My son. If Walter has given you this letter, It means you are ready to stand up for yourself. I am prouder of you in this moment than I can express. I know you are probably feeling many things right now. Anger at Vivian. Confusion about why I kept secrets. Perhaps even anger at me for not telling you sooner. But I want you to understand something important. The money I am leaving you is not the inheritance that matters. Buildings and accounts can be lost or gained. They are just tools. The real inheritance is this: the knowledge that you are worth more than anyone who has tried to diminish you. The understanding that kindness is not weakness. The certainty that you can stand on your own 2 feet and claim what is yours. Your mother and I raised you to be a good man. Vivian tried to convince you that good men are weak men. She was wrong, and soon she will learn exactly how wrong. I have watched you for years, waiting for this moment. The moment when you would stop accepting less than you deserve. The moment when you would remember who you are. I am sorry I cannot be there to see it. But I have done everything I can to ensure you will not face this battle alone. Use the tools I have left you. But remember that the strength was always yours. It just took someone trying to take everything from you for you to finally claim it. Go make me proud, son. Your father. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my jacket pocket next to the first one. Walter was watching me with eyes that had probably seen hundreds of people in moments like this. Moments of transformation. Moments when someone realized they were not as powerless as they had been led to believe. What do you want to do, Raymond? I want to make sure she faces consequences for what she did. Not revenge. Just truth. Just what is fair. Walter nodded slowly. Then I suggest we prepare for the formal divorce hearing. We will present your inheritance as newly relevant information. We will document her concealment of assets. And we will ensure that the final settlement reflects reality rather than her manipulations. She will be surprised. Walter's expression flickered with something that might have been satisfaction. I suspect surprise will be the least of what she feels. We spent the next 2 hours going over strategy. Walter explained the legal process, the documentation we would need, the timeline for filing motions and presenting evidence. His younger colleagues would handle the courtroom work, but Walter would oversee everything. He owed that much to my father, he said. By the time I left his office, the sun was setting over the city. My city, I realized. My father had owned pieces of it for decades. Had helped build it in ways no one knew. Had walked its streets as a humble janitor and watchmaker while quietly accumulating the resources that would now protect his son. I drove to the cemetery as the light faded. My father's grave was in a quiet section near a row of old oak trees. Simple headstone. Edward Harlow, 1945 to 2020. The epitaph I had chosen seemed more appropriate now than when I had selected it 4 years ago. Every small thing matters. I sat on the grass beside the grave and talked to him for the first time since his funeral. I found them, Dad. The documents. The letters. Everything. The wind rustled through the oak leaves. I wish you had told me. But I think I understand why you did not. A bird called from somewhere in the trees. She is going to be so surprised. That woman who mocked you. Who called you small. Who spent a decade convincing me that I was lucky she chose me. I paused, thinking about the emails in Walter's file. The casual cruelty. The years of planning while I remained oblivious. You saw it all. You watched her diminish me and you prepared for this day. I am sorry I did not see it sooner. I am sorry I did not defend you more when she was dismissive. The evening shadows lengthened across the cemetery. But I see it now. I see everything now. And I'm going to make sure she understands exactly who your son is. I stayed until the darkness was complete. Then I drove home to prepare for what came next. The formal divorce hearing was scheduled for the following month. Vivian had pushed for an early date, eager to finalize everything and begin her new life with Marcus. She had no idea that the expedited timeline would work against her. I spent the intervening weeks working with Walter's team, documenting everything, preparing evidence, building the case that would reveal the truth about both of our financial positions. I also continued my normal routine as much as possible, working on furniture in my workshop, meeting occasionally with my sister Catherine, who was cautiously supportive but clearly confused by my apparent calm. You seem different, she said over coffee one afternoon. Less devastated than I expected. Maybe I am finally remembering who I am. She studied me for a long moment. Dad always said you were stronger than you knew. I think he was right. He usually was. There were moments of doubt. Nights when I wondered if I was doing the right thing. Vivian had been my wife for 11 years. We had built a life together, or so I had thought. Destroying her reputation and potentially facing her with criminal charges felt extreme even after everything she had done. But then I would reread the emails in Walter's file. The casual cruelty. The calculation. The complete absence of remorse or affection. This was not a woman who had drifted away from a marriage. This was someone who had systematically positioned herself to take everything while leaving me with nothing. She had spent years preparing to discard me and had felt no guilt about it whatsoever. The morning of the hearing arrived with unseasonable sunshine. I dressed carefully. Not in expensive clothing because I did not own any, but in clean pressed clothes that made me feel competent and prepared. The sport coat had belonged to my father. I had found it in one of the storage boxes, and it fit perfectly. Catherine called as I was leaving. Good luck today. Whatever happens, I am proud of you. Thank you, Kat. I will call you after. The courthouse was a massive stone building downtown, all columns and carved inscriptions about justice and truth. I had driven past it hundreds of times without really seeing it. Now it loomed with significance. Walter Fennick met me in the lobby. He was accompanied by a younger attorney named Sarah Chen, who would handle most of the courtroom presentation. Walter would be there primarily to present my father's estate information and to serve as a reminder that I was not the powerless man Vivian believed me to be. "Are you ready?" Walter asked. "I think so. Remember, stay calm no matter what she says. Let the documents speak for themselves. Your job is simply to be present and dignified." I nodded. Sarah reviewed the sequence of events one more time. Vivian's attorney would present their side first, reiterating the settlement from mediation. Then we would introduce our evidence. First, the inheritance information that changed my financial position. Then the documentation of concealed assets that revealed hers. We entered the courtroom. It was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling and fluorescent lights and rows of bench seating like a church designed by bureaucrats. The judge's bench dominated the front wall, raised on a platform with the state seal mounted behind it. Vivian was already there. She sat at the petitioner's table with Preston Gale, looking confident and polished in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my car. Her hair was perfect. Her makeup was flawless. She radiated the kind of self-assurance that came from believing you had already won. Marcus Webb sat in the gallery behind her. He was checking his phone, probably clearing his schedule for the celebration dinner they had planned for that evening. Vivian glanced up as I entered. Her expression flickered with something like satisfaction when she saw me. The sport coat was old and slightly worn. My shoes were practical rather than expensive. I looked exactly like what she had always told people I was. A man who had failed to meet her standards. I took my seat at the respondent's table and waited. Judge Patricia Thornton entered a few minutes later. She was in her 60s with silver hair pulled back severely and a reputation for fairness combined with absolute intolerance for games. Walter had told me this was good news. Judge Thornton had no patience for wealthy people who tried to manipulate the system. "Good morning," the judge said, settling into her chair and reviewing the case file. "We are here today for the formal finalization of divorce proceedings in Thompson versus Thompson." Wait, wrong file. She shuffled papers. "Harlow versus Harlow. My apologies. Long morning." She spent a few minutes reviewing the preliminary documents, then addressed the courtroom. "Mr. Gale, you represent the petitioner. I understand you wish to present the settlement terms negotiated in mediation." Preston Gale rose smoothly. "Yes, Your Honor. We believe the terms are fair and equitable and represent a reasonable division of marital assets." He launched into a presentation I had heard before. Vivian as the primary earner. Me as the economically inactive spouse who had failed to contribute meaningfully to our financial growth. The settlement as generous given the circumstances. "My client has built her business through years of dedication and sacrifice," Preston concluded. "The proposed settlement allows Mr. Harlow to retain certain assets while acknowledging that the substantial wealth generated during this marriage was primarily the result of Mrs. Harlow's efforts." I watched Vivian nodding along with her attorney's words. She believed every syllable. She genuinely thought she had earned everything through her own brilliance while I had contributed nothing. She had no idea what was coming. Judge Thornton turned to our table. Mr. Harlow, you are represented by counsel today. Sarah Chen rose. Yes, Your Honor. I am Sarah Chen representing the respondent together with Mr. Walter Fenwick. The judge's eyebrows lifted slightly at Walter's name. He was well known in legal circles. His presence suggested something unexpected. Does the respondent accept the settlement as proposed? Sarah's voice was calm and clear. No, Your Honor. We do not. We have significant new information that materially affects the division of assets in this case. Preston Gale was on his feet immediately. Objection, Your Honor. This is clearly a delay tactic. Mr. Harlow has had months to present any relevant information. Judge Thornton held up a hand. I will determine what is or is not relevant, counsel. Ms. Chen, what is the nature of this new information? We have documentation showing that the respondent has substantial inherited assets that were not previously disclosed because the inheritance was not legally finalized until recently. We also have evidence that the petitioner has been concealing significant marital assets through offshore accounts and undisclosed financial vehicles. The courtroom went silent. I watched Vivian's face. The confidence faltered. Her eyes darted to Preston, who was frantically scribbling notes. Then she looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Uncertainty. Your Honor, Preston said, his voice slightly less smooth than before. This is highly irregular. These allegations are clearly designed to delay proceedings and harass my client. Harassment, Sarah replied calmly, is when someone conceals marital assets with the intention of defrauding their spouse. We have extensive documentation of exactly that. Judge Thornton studied both attorneys for a long moment. This is a serious allegation. I am going to need to see this documentation before we proceed. Sarah handed a thick folder to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. I watched Judge Thornton begin to review the pages, her expression growing progressively more severe. Mr. Fenwick, she said finally, I understand you are here representing an estate matter connected to this case. Walter rose slowly, his dignified presence commanding attention despite his years. Yes, Your Honor. I represent the estate of Edward Harlow, the respondent's late father. There are documents that bear directly on these proceedings. Please approach. Walter walked to the bench carrying a leather portfolio that I recognized as my father's. He spoke quietly with the judge for several minutes, presenting documents and explaining their significance. I could not hear what he was saying, but I could see Vivian's expression change as the conversation continued. The uncertainty became confusion. The confusion became something closer to fear. Preston whispered urgently in her ear. She shook her head in response. This was not part of her script. This was not how victory was supposed to feel. Judge Thornton finally looked up from the documents. This is highly unusual. She addressed the courtroom with a gravity that silenced any remaining whispers. The court will recess for 1 hour to allow proper review of this new evidence. When we reconvene, I expect both parties to be prepared to address some very serious discrepancies in the financial disclosures provided during mediation. She banged her gavel. As the courtroom rose for the judge's departure, Vivian finally looked directly at me. Really looked. Searching for some explanation, some hint of what was happening. I met her gaze without expression. For 11 years she had studied me, had learned exactly where to place her words for maximum impact, had convinced herself she knew everything about who I was and what I was capable of. She had been wrong, and in 1 hour, she would finally understand exactly how wrong she had been. The recess felt like both an eternity and an instant. I sat in a small conference room with Walter and Sarah, reviewing the presentation strategy one more time. But my mind kept returning to the courtroom, to the look on Vivian's face when she realized something had gone terribly wrong with her careful plans. What do you think she is doing right now? I asked. Walter smiled slightly. Panicking. Trying to understand how we obtained this information. Probably calling every banker and accountant she knows, trying to figure out how exposed she really is. Will she try to settle? Perhaps. But it is too late for that now. The judge has seen the evidence of concealment. Even if Vivian offers favorable terms, Judge Thornton is going to want answers about the hidden accounts. I thought about the emails in Walter's file. The casual cruelty. The certainty that I would accept whatever scrap she offered because I had no resources to fight back. She never imagined this could happen. No, Walter agreed. She never imagined your father was anything more than a janitor with a watch repair hobby. I pulled out my father's letter and read the final lines again. Do not let anyone convince you that kindness is weakness. I was about to prove exactly what those words meant. The courtroom felt different when we returned. The afternoon light had shifted, casting different shadows across the wood paneling. The gallery had a few more observers now, court watchers who had heard through the legal grapevine that something interesting was happening in the Harlow divorce case. Vivian and Preston were already at their table. Marcus Webb was conspicuously absent from the gallery. Even before the proceedings resumed, the alliance was already fracturing. Judge Thornton entered and everyone rose. When she sat, her expression was severe. I have reviewed the documents presented during our recess. I have significant concerns about the accuracy of the financial disclosures provided by the petitioner during mediation. Your Honor, Preston began. I was not finished, Mr. Gale. The judge cut him off. I also have questions about the newly revealed estate that apparently affects the respondent's financial position considerably. We are going to proceed methodically through these matters. I suggest everyone get comfortable. She turned to Walter. Mr. Fenwick, please present the information regarding the respondent's inheritance. Walter rose and approached the bench. Thank you, Your Honor. Edward Harlow, the respondent's father, passed away 4 years ago. His estate was held in trust pending certain conditions being met. Those conditions have now been satisfied, and the full estate passes to his son Raymond Harlow. The assets were listed one by one. Commercial property at 412 Main Street, current value $890,000. Commercial property at 58 Harbor Road, current value $720,000. Commercial property at 1100 Industrial Way, current value $680,000. Commercial property at 77 Downtown Plaza, current value $940,000. Partnership interest in Crawford Development Consortium, value $340,000. Investment accounts, value $780,000. Additional holdings, value $450,000. Walter paused. Total estate value approximately $3.8 million. The number seemed to echo in the silent courtroom. Vivian made a strangled sound. I heard her whisper urgently to Preston. That is impossible. His father was a janitor. Walter continued without acknowledging the interruption. Furthermore, Your Honor, one of these commercial properties, the building at 77 Downtown Plaza, currently houses the primary offices of Harlow Wellness Brands. The petitioner's company. Another beat of silence. The respondent is, in effect, his wife's landlord. Vivian's face had gone completely pale. She was staring at me with an expression that combined shock and something that might have been horror. Preston Gale tried to recover. Your Honor, while this is certainly unexpected news about Mr. Harlow's inheritance, I fail to see how it changes the fundamental nature of the proposed settlement. These are assets inherited after the date of separation. Actually, Judge Thornton said dryly, the inheritance consists largely of properties acquired well before the marriage. If anything, this raises questions about why the mediation settlement characterized Mr. Harlow as economically inactive when he was apparently heir to a substantial estate. He did not know, Preston protested. Mrs. Harlow cannot be held responsible for assets her husband was unaware of. That is true, the judge agreed. Which brings us to the second matter. Assets that Mrs. Harlow was apparently aware of but failed to disclose. She turned to Sarah. Ms. Chen. Present your evidence regarding the concealed accounts. Sarah rose and began methodically walking through the documentation. Offshore accounts. Shell companies. Systematic transfers designed to hide marital assets. Email exchanges that revealed Vivian's intentional strategy to minimize what I would receive in the divorce. Each piece of evidence landed like a separate blow. Vivian tried to interrupt several times, but Judge Thornton silenced her. Preston's objections grew increasingly desperate and increasingly ineffective. When Sarah finished, the courtroom was silent. Judge Thornton removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. Mrs. Harlow. She addressed Vivian directly. Are you aware that concealing assets during divorce proceedings constitutes fraud? Vivian opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Are you further aware that understating income for tax purposes is a criminal offense that can result in significant penalties, including imprisonment? Your Honor, Preston jumped in. My client will need time to consult with appropriate counsel before responding to these allegations. I imagine she will, Judge Thornton said. But that does not change the fact that this court has been presented with substantial evidence of financial fraud. She turned to Walter. Mr. Fenwick, is there anything else the court should be aware of? Walter rose one final time. Yes, Your Honor. There is one additional document. Edward Harlow left specific instructions for a letter to be read aloud if his son ever faced someone attempting to take advantage of his perceived vulnerability. He withdrew an envelope and began to read. To anyone who believes my son can be dismissed or diminished. The courtroom was completely silent. You have made a serious error in judgment. Raymond is my son, which means he carries the strength of people who built their lives through patience, attention, and the courage to remain decent in a world that rewards cruelty. He is not a man who can be mocked, underestimated, or discarded without consequence. Walter paused. I watched his marriage more carefully than he knew. I saw how his confidence was worn away. I saw how his contributions were dismissed. I saw him shrink to fit into someone else's small idea of who he should be. Vivian was crying now. Not from remorse. From the collapse of everything she had planned. I built these resources so he would never be without protection. Not to fight his battles for him, but to ensure he would never fight them alone. My son is kind because he is strong enough to be kind. Anyone who mistakes that kindness for weakness will learn the difference. Walter folded the letter. And they will learn it too late. Judge Thornton was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke. This court is going to take a brief recess to determine appropriate next steps. However, I want to be clear about what I have seen today. She looked directly at Vivian. Mrs. Harlow, you came into this courtroom expecting to finalize a settlement that would have left your husband with almost nothing while you retained substantial hidden assets. Instead, you are now facing potential criminal referrals for fraud and tax evasion. She turned to me. Mr. Harlow, your father appears to have been a remarkable man. I hope you will honor his memory by using these resources wisely. Then she banged her gavel. Court is in recess. As everyone rose, Vivian remained seated. Frozen. She looked like someone who had walked confidently into a building and found the floor suddenly missing beneath her feet. Preston was gathering his papers quickly, already calculating his exit strategy. Whatever happened next, he wanted to be positioned as an attorney who had been misled by his client rather than complicit in her schemes. I walked past their table toward the exit. Vivian grabbed my arm. Raymond. Wait. Please. I stopped but did not turn. We can work this out. 12 years, Raymond. We were married for 12 years. Does that not mean anything to you? I turned to face her. Her makeup was smeared. Her perfect composure had shattered completely. She looked desperate in a way I had never seen before. It meant everything to me, Vivian. That is why it hurt so much to learn it meant nothing to you. I meant what I said. In the mediation. I did not know about any of this. Things would have been different if I had known. She stopped. Realizing what she was admitting. Things would have been different if you had known I had money, I said quietly. That is exactly the point. I gently removed her hand from my arm. You mocked my father. Called him a man without ambition. Said he never aspired to more than his little corner storefront. And all along you were paying rent to his estate. Working in a building he owned. Raymond, please. He saw who you really were. He watched you diminish me for years. And he loved me enough to prepare for this exact moment. I stepped back. There is nothing to discuss, Vivian. The documents speak for themselves. I walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Walter was waiting in the hallway. He put a hand on my shoulder. Your father would be so proud. I know, I said. And for the first time since I had opened that leather folder in the storage unit, I allowed myself to feel everything. The grief and the anger and the vindication and the love. All of it mixed together into something I could not name. My father had spent a lifetime watching, waiting, preparing, and in the end, he had reached across death itself to protect me. I walked out of the courthouse into the afternoon sunshine. The city stretched before me. Buildings my father had owned. Streets he had walked as a janitor and a watchmaker while quietly building an empire no one knew existed. Somewhere behind me, Vivian was facing the consequences of her choices. The investigations would begin. The settlements would be renegotiated. The life she had built on manipulation and concealment was collapsing around her. But that was her story now. Mine was just beginning. The afternoon air outside the courthouse felt different than it had that morning. When I had arrived, I was still the man Vivian believed me to be. Quiet. Diminished. Ready to accept whatever scraps she decided to leave behind. The sport coat that had belonged to my father felt like borrowed confidence, something I was wearing rather than something I owned. Now everything had shifted. I stood on the courthouse steps and watched the city move around me. Cars and pedestrians and the ordinary business of a Tuesday afternoon. None of them knew what had just happened in that courtroom. None of them knew that a woman who had spent a decade building an empire of manipulation had just watched it begin to crumble. Walter Fenwick emerged from the building behind me. He moved slowly, his 78 years more apparent now than they had been in the courtroom where he had commanded attention with quiet authority. "The judge has called for a 2-hour recess," he said. "When we reconvene, she will issue preliminary rulings on the settlement and determine next steps regarding the fraud allegations." "What do you think will happen?" Walter considered the question carefully. Judge Thornton takes a dim view of people who try to manipulate her courtroom. She has seen the evidence of concealment. At minimum, the original settlement will be thrown out and a new division of assets will be ordered based on accurate financial disclosures. And the criminal referrals. That depends on several factors. If Vivian cooperates fully and makes restitution, Judge Thornton may choose to handle this as a civil matter. If she continues to obstruct or deny, the judge will almost certainly refer the case to the district attorney. I thought about Vivian's face in the courtroom. The shock giving way to desperation. The tears that had nothing to do with remorse. "She is not going to cooperate," I said. "She does not know how." Walter nodded slowly. "Your father said something similar once. He told me that Vivian was the kind of person who would rather burn everything down than admit she had been wrong." He was observant. He was more than observant, Raymond. He understood people in ways that most of us never manage. That is how he built what he built. Not just through financial acumen but through genuine insight into human nature. We walked together to a small park across from the courthouse. The benches were occupied by people eating lunch, checking phones, living their ordinary lives. I sat down heavily and stared at the fountain in the center of the square. "I keep thinking about all the times I defended her," I said. "To my father. To Catherine. To myself. I made excuses for behavior that should have been inexcusable. That is what people do when they love someone. They extend grace. They believe the best. But she never loved me. The emails make that clear. I was just useful until I was not." Walter sat beside me with the careful movements of an old man who had learned to conserve energy. "I cannot speak to what Vivian felt or did not feel. But I can tell you that your father never blamed you for trusting her. He blamed her for being unworthy of that trust." We sat in silence for several minutes. The fountain burbled. Birds landed on the brick pavement looking for dropped crumbs. The world continued as if nothing significant had happened. "What did you think of her?" I asked finally. "When you first investigated?" Walter considered the question. "I thought she was intelligent. Ambitious. Skilled at presenting whatever face a situation required. But I also thought she was hollow in some fundamental way. There was no center to her. No core values that guided her behavior beyond self-interest." "That is a harsh assessment." "Perhaps. But it has proven accurate, has it not?" I could not argue with that. When we returned to the courthouse, the atmosphere had changed again. Vivian was no longer at the petitioner's table. Preston Gale sat alone, looking harried and uncomfortable. A different attorney had joined him, a woman I did not recognize who was whispering urgently in his ear. Sarah Chen leaned toward me as we took our seats. Vivian requested a private meeting with the judge during the recess. Preston is claiming he was misled by his client about the extent of her assets. He is trying to protect himself. Everyone is trying to protect themselves at this point. Except you. Judge Thornton entered and the courtroom rose. When she sat, her expression was even more severe than before. I have spent the recess reviewing additional documentation and conducting private conferences with both parties. She looked directly at the empty chair where Vivian should have been sitting. Mrs. Harlow has been excused to consult with additional legal counsel regarding matters that extend beyond the scope of these divorce proceedings. She turned to Preston Gale. Mr. Gale, I understand you wish to make a statement. Preston rose. He looked like a man trying to distance himself from an explosion. Your Honor, I want to be clear that I was provided with financial disclosures by my client that I had no reason to believe were incomplete or inaccurate. Had I known the true extent of Mrs. Harlow's assets and the methods by which they were concealed, I would not have presented the settlement terms that were offered in mediation. The judge studied him for a long moment. I see. So you are claiming that you were deceived by your own client. I am claiming that I presented information in good faith that has now been revealed to be false. Judge Thornton made a note. We will address your potential liability at a later date, Mr. Gale. For now, I need to issue rulings that will govern the remainder of these proceedings. She folded her hands. First, the settlement agreed upon in mediation is hereby vacated. The terms were based on materially false financial disclosures and cannot stand. Preston started to speak, but the judge silenced him with a look. Second, a new accounting of marital assets will be conducted by a court-appointed forensic accountant. Both parties will provide complete access to all financial records, domestic and foreign. Any attempt to conceal, transfer, or destroy assets from this point forward will be treated as contempt of court and referred for criminal prosecution. She paused. Third, given the evidence of substantial asset concealment by the petitioner and the newly revealed inheritance of the respondent, I am issuing a preliminary ruling that favors a significantly revised division of assets. The specifics will be determined once the forensic accounting is complete. Finally, the matter of potential tax fraud and financial fraud will be referred to the District Attorney's Office for investigation. This court does not have jurisdiction over criminal matters, but I have an obligation to report evidence of crimes when it comes to my attention. She looked at me directly. Mr. Harlow, do you have anything you wish to say? I rose slowly. Only that I want this to be fair, Your Honor. I am not seeking revenge. I simply want an honest accounting of what was built during our marriage and what belongs to each of us. Judge Thornton's expression softened slightly. That is a remarkably measured response given the circumstances. I will take your stated intentions into consideration as we move forward. She banged her gavel. Court is adjourned until further notice. All parties will be contacted when the forensic accounting is complete. The next weeks passed in a strange combination of activity and waiting. Walter's firm handled most of the legal work. Forensic accountants descended on Vivian's business records. Subpoenas were issued for offshore bank accounts. The scope of her concealment became clearer with each passing day. She had hidden nearly $400,000 in accounts that were never disclosed during our marriage. She had underreported income for tax purposes for at least 5 years. She had used business funds for personal expenses in ways that constituted fraud against her own investors. The wellness empire she had built was founded on deception at every level. I received updates from Sarah Chen but tried not to focus too much on the details. What mattered was that the truth was finally being documented. What Vivian did with that truth was her own concern. Instead, I focused on rebuilding. My father's estate included not just the properties and investment accounts but also the watch repair shop on Main Street. It had been closed since his death, but the building remained. I began spending my days there, cleaning out the accumulated dust and debris, rediscovering the space where he had worked for 43 years. The shop was small, perhaps 400 square feet, with a narrow counter at the front and a workbench in the back. Display cases lined the walls, now empty of the watches that had once filled them. The air still carried a faint trace of machine oil and metal polish. I found his tools in the back room. Hundreds of tiny instruments organized with the same precision he had brought to everything. Tweezers and screwdrivers and magnifying loops. Files smaller than matchsticks. Springs and gears and crystals sorted into labeled compartments. He had spent his days in this quiet space, working on mechanisms that most people found impossibly intricate. Bringing broken things back to life. Making small things work properly again. I understood now why he had loved it so much. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the courthouse revelation, I was cleaning the front windows when someone knocked on the glass. Catherine stood on the sidewalk looking uncertain. I unlocked the door and let her in. She looked around the dusty shop with an expression caught between curiosity and sadness. I still cannot believe Dad owned all those buildings. She ran her finger along the empty display case. He never said anything. Never even hinted. He had his reasons. Did he tell you about them? In the letters. Some of it. He wanted us to develop our own characters without knowing there was money waiting. He thought it would make us complacent. Catherine laughed, but not unkindly. Instead, he watched us both struggle for years. You especially. That marriage. She shook her head. I wanted to say something so many times, Raymond. I know. I was not ready to hear it. She walked to the back of the shop and looked at the workbench with its neat rows of tools. What are you going to do with this place? Sell it. I do not know yet. For now, I just wanted to spend time here. Try to understand him better. Catherine turned to face me. He was proud of you. I know he never said it much, but I could tell. Whenever your name came up, his whole demeanor changed. Like he was carrying a good secret. I felt my throat tighten. He was carrying a lot of secrets apparently. But the important one was how much he loved you. She crossed the room and put her hand on my arm. How are you really doing, Raymond? With all of this? I considered the question honestly. Better than I expected. The marriage ending. That was painful but also clarifying. Finding out about Dad's estate. That was shocking but also affirming. Like he was still looking out for me even though he has been gone for years. And Vivian. What happens to her? I do not know. And I am trying not to care too much. She made her choices. Now she faces the consequences. My job is not to orchestrate those consequences. Just to build whatever comes next. Catherine hugged me then. A real hug, not the awkward half embraces we had exchanged for years when Vivian was around making everything uncomfortable. Dad would be so proud of you, she whispered. You already said that. It bears repeating. The forensic accounting took 2 months to complete. When the final report came in, even Walter seemed surprised by the extent of what they had found. She was very thorough, he said, spreading documents across his conference table. Hidden accounts in 4 different countries. Shell companies designed to obscure ownership. Investments made with funds that should have been reported as marital assets. The total hidden amount came to $473,000. Added to the assets she had disclosed, Vivian's true net worth during our marriage had been nearly double what she claimed. More importantly for the divorce settlement, the forensic accountants had traced the origins of much of her business capital. My mother's inheritance, the $40,000 I had given her to start the wellness brand, had been the seed money for nearly everything she built. She used your money to build a business that she then used to generate income that she hid from you, Sarah Chen summarized. It is almost elegant in its cruelty. I stared at the numbers without really seeing them. What does this mean for the settlement? It means you are entitled to a significantly larger share than the original mediation proposed. Given the fraud involved, Judge Thornton is likely to rule in your favor on almost everything. And the criminal charges. The district attorney's office has opened an investigation. They have not yet decided whether to prosecute, but the evidence is substantial. Tax evasion alone could result in significant penalties. I thought about Vivian facing prison. It should have felt satisfying. Instead, it just felt heavy. I do not want her destroyed, I said. I just wanted the truth to matter. Walter nodded slowly. Your father said you would say something like that. He told me that your kindness was genuine, not weakness disguised as kindness. That you would want justice but not vengeance. What did he suggest? He suggested we let you make your own choice when the time came. If you want to advocate for leniency, we can do that. If you want to pursue maximum consequences, we can do that too. This is your decision, Raymond. I sat with the question for a long moment. Let the legal process unfold, I said finally. Whatever consequences she faces should be determined by the law, not by my desire for revenge or my desire to appear merciful. I will not advocate either way. Walter smiled. Your father would approve of that answer. The final divorce hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in early autumn. The leaves had begun to turn. The air carried that particular quality of light that came with the changing season. I drove to the courthouse thinking about beginnings and endings, about how the same moment could be both. Vivian was present this time. She looked different than she had at the mediation 4 months earlier. Thinner. Older somehow. The polished confidence had been replaced by something more brittle. She sat at the petitioner's table with a new attorney, someone from a smaller firm who specialized in damage control rather than victory. Marcus Webb was nowhere to be seen. I had heard through Catherine that he had distanced himself completely once the investigations began. Whatever future Vivian had imagined with him had evaporated along with her hidden assets. Judge Thornton entered and we all rose. She reviewed the documents before her with methodical care. Then she began to speak. This case has revealed a pattern of financial deception that this court finds deeply troubling. Mrs. Harlow systematically concealed marital assets, underreported income, and presented materially false information during mediation proceedings. These actions constitute fraud against this court and against her spouse. Vivian stared straight ahead, her face carefully neutral. Based on the forensic accounting and the evidence presented, this court orders the following division of assets. The judge listed properties, accounts, and valuations with precise efficiency. When she was finished, I had received 65% of the total marital assets, plus compensation for the fraud committed during mediation. Vivian retained her business, such as it remained after the investigations, and enough liquid assets to rebuild if she chose. It was more than I had expected. Less than some might argue I deserved. Additionally, Judge Thornton continued, the District Attorney's Office has agreed to defer prosecution on the tax evasion charges pending Mrs. Harlow's full cooperation with ongoing investigations and payment of substantial penalties and back taxes. Should she comply with all requirements, criminal charges may ultimately be declined. Vivian's attorney whispered something to her. She nodded without expression. Finally, regarding the monthly support payments outlined in the original settlement. Given the respondent's substantial inherited assets and the petitioner's demonstrated financial resources, this court finds that no spousal support is necessary or appropriate from either party. Judge Thornton removed her glasses and looked at both of us. I have been on this bench for 18 years. I have seen divorces driven by genuine irreconcilable differences. I have seen divorces driven by changed circumstances and growth in different directions. And I have seen divorces driven by calculated betrayal. She paused. This case falls into the third category. Mrs. Harlow, you spent years positioning yourself to extract maximum advantage from a marriage while minimizing your husband's ability to protect himself. You dismissed his family, undermined his confidence, and planned to leave him with almost nothing. Vivian's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Mr. Harlow, your father clearly loved you very much. He saw what was happening and prepared accordingly. Not to fight your battles for you, but to ensure you would have resources when you were ready to fight them yourself. That is perhaps the most profound act of parental love I have encountered in my years on the bench. I felt tears threatening and blinked them back. This divorce is granted. The marriage between Raymond Harlow and Vivian Harlow is hereby dissolved. May you both find whatever peace is available to you. She banged her gavel one final time. I did not speak to Vivian as we left the courtroom. She tried to approach me in the hallway. Her new attorney held her arm, advising caution, but she pulled away. Raymond. Wait. Please. I stopped but did not turn. I know you probably hate me. And I understand why. But I need you to know that it was not all a lie. There were real moments. Times when I genuinely... She trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. I turned to face her. She looked fragile in a way I had never seen before. The armor she had worn throughout our marriage had cracked open, revealing something smaller and more uncertain beneath. I do not hate you, Vivian. The words surprised us both. I am angry. I am hurt. I spent 11 years with someone who was performing rather than present, and I did not see it until it was almost too late. But hatred requires energy I would rather spend on other things. She stared at me, searching for something in my expression. Your father, she said slowly. I never understood him. I thought he was just a simple man who fixed watches. I thought you were like him. Limited. Content with small things. We were like him, I said. And you never understood that being content with small things done well is not the same as being limited. She was quiet for a moment. I am sorry. For what that is worth. It is worth something, I said. Not enough to change what happened. But something. I walked away without looking back. The autumn deepened. I sold 2 of the commercial properties my father had left me, keeping the watch shop building and the one that had housed Vivian's offices. The first I planned to renovate. The second I sold to the tenants who had been leasing it, happy to be free of any connection to my former wife's business. The money from the sales, combined with the divorce settlement and the remaining investment accounts, gave me more financial security than I had ever imagined. But I found that the security mattered less than I would have expected. What mattered was time. Freedom. The ability to decide each day what I wanted to do with my hours rather than arranging them around someone else's demands and criticisms. I converted the back room of the watch shop into a proper woodworking studio. The space was small but well lit. I installed proper ventilation and built workbenches suited to furniture making. The tools accumulated gradually, each one chosen with care and purpose. My first project was a simple table. Cherry wood with hand-cut joinery. Nothing elaborate. But every piece fit precisely. Every joint was tight and true. Every surface was sanded smooth and finished with patient attention. It took 3 months to complete. When I stepped back and looked at the finished piece, I understood for the first time what my father had meant about small things done properly. The table was not going to change the world. It was not going to make me famous or wealthy. But it was good work. Honest work. Something I could be proud of. I photographed it and posted the images online. Within a week, someone contacted me asking if I would make them something similar. A business was born. Not a large business. Not an empire like Vivian had tried to build. But something sustainable and meaningful. Custom furniture made with care, sold to people who appreciated craftsmanship over mass production. I worked slowly, deliberately, one project at a time, giving each piece the attention it deserved. Word spread gradually through the community. A local design magazine ran a small feature. A restaurant commissioned a set of dining tables. An architect began recommending my work to clients who wanted something unique. By spring, I had more commissions than I could handle. I turned some away rather than rush through them. Quality mattered more than quantity. My father had taught me that even if I had not understood the lesson until now. Catherine visited the workshop one afternoon as I was finishing a bookshelf for a professor at the local university. She walked around the space slowly, touching the wood surfaces, examining the tools hung neatly on their designated hooks. This is beautiful, Raymond. All of it. The space. The work. You seem so different from a year ago. I am different. I set down the sandpaper and brushed dust from my hands. For years I thought there was something wrong with me. Vivian kept saying I lacked ambition, that I was content with too little, that I was not trying hard enough to be something more. I believed her. I thought she must be right because she seemed so certain. But she was wrong. Completely wrong. I was not lacking ambition. I was just pursuing a different kind of success than she valued. And once I stopped trying to fit into her definition of what mattered, I finally had room to figure out my own. Catherine perched on a stool near my workbench. Have you heard anything about her lately? Some. The tax investigation concluded a few months ago. She paid substantial penalties but avoided prosecution. Her business survived. Barely. She is rebuilding, apparently. Do you care? I considered the question honestly. Less than I would have expected. What she does with her life is her own concern now. I have my own life to focus on. And is there anyone new in your life? Someone to share all this with? The question made me smile. Not yet. But I am open to the possibility. When the right person comes along. Catherine grinned. Dad always said you would find someone who appreciated you properly. Someone who valued kindness rather than seeing it as weakness. Dad said a lot of things apparently. I just wish he had said them to me directly. He was protecting you in his own way. Making sure you developed your own strength before you had resources to fall back on. I know. And I understand it now better than I did. But I still miss him. Every day. Catherine reached out and squeezed my hand. He knew that too. And he loved you for it. The 1-year anniversary of the courthouse revelation passed without ceremony. I spent the day working on a commission for a young couple furnishing their first home. A dining table where they would share meals and conversations and the small moments that build a life together. I thought about what my father had written about kindness not being weakness. About building something real through patience and attention and care. That evening, I drove to the cemetery. The oak trees were in full leaf now, providing shade over my father's grave. I sat on the grass and talked to him as I had done many times over the past year. I finished the bookshelf for Professor Hendricks. I think you would have approved of the joinery. Dovetails on all the drawers, hand-cut rather than machine-made. Takes longer but the result is stronger. A bird landed on a nearby branch and regarded me with small bright eyes. The business is growing. Not fast, but steadily. I could expand if I wanted to. Hire employees. Take on more work. But that feels wrong somehow. You always said every mechanism deserves attention. I think furniture is the same way. Each piece deserves my full focus. The evening light softened, turning golden. I met someone. Her name is Claire. She restores old buildings for a living. She came to the workshop looking for someone to recreate some historical furniture pieces for a renovation she is doing downtown. I paused, remembering the moment. She understood immediately what I was trying to do. Did not ask why I was working so slowly or suggest ways to be more efficient. Just watched me for a few minutes and said the joinery was beautiful. That most people would not notice, but the dovetails were perfect. The memory made me smile. We have had coffee a few times. Dinner once. She asks questions and actually listens to the answers. She talks about her own work with the same kind of care I try to bring to mine. It is still early. I do not know what it will become. I pulled a handful of grass and let it fall through my fingers. But I wanted you to know. Because I think you would have liked her. She sees value in the same things you did. Old buildings. Careful work. Making things right rather than making things fast. The sun continued its slow descent toward the horizon. I understand now why you lived the way you did. The small apartment. The old car. The janitor job you could have quit years before you died. It was not about the money. It was about staying connected to what mattered. Staying grounded in real work and real people. I stood and brushed grass from my trousers. I'm trying to live that way too. Not exactly like you did. But carrying the same values forward. Making small things matter. Being kind because I am strong enough to be kind. I placed my hand on the headstone. Thank you, Dad. For everything you built. Everything you protected. Everything you taught me even when you were not there to say the words. The stone was warm from the afternoon sun. I miss you. But I am okay now. Better than okay. I am becoming who I was supposed to be all along. I walked back to my car as the first stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Claire and I had dinner the following weekend. She was telling me about a Victorian house she was restoring on the east side of town. The owners had asked her to maintain the historical character while making the space functional for a modern family. It was the kind of challenge she loved, finding the balance between preservation and adaptation. I watched her talk and felt something shift inside me. Her enthusiasm was genuine. Not performed like Vivian's had always been. Not designed to impress or manipulate. She cared about her work the way I cared about mine, and that caring came through in every gesture and expression. You are staring, she said, interrupting herself with a slight smile. Sorry. I was just thinking about how nice this is. The dinner. All of it. Being here. Talking about things that matter. Feeling like the person I am talking to actually sees me. Claire set down her fork. Can I ask you something personal? Of course. Your marriage. You do not talk about it much, but I know it ended recently. And I know it was difficult. I considered how to answer. It was difficult. But not in the way you might think. The difficult part was not the divorce itself. It was recognizing how long I had been diminished without understanding what was happening. How many years I had spent trying to be someone smaller so that another person could feel larger. Claire nodded slowly. I had a relationship like that once. Not a marriage, but close. Someone who needed me to be less so they could be more. What happened? I eventually realized I was disappearing. Piece by piece. Every compromise, every accommodation, every time I made myself smaller to avoid conflict. Until one day I looked in the mirror and did not recognize who was looking back. That is exactly how it felt. How did you find yourself again? I started paying attention to the things that made me feel real. Old buildings. Careful work. The satisfaction of restoring something that had been neglected and bringing out the beauty that was always there beneath the damage. She smiled. I think that is what your furniture does too. Takes raw materials and reveals the beauty inside them through patient attention. My father would have liked you, I said. Tell me about him. So I did. I told her about the watch shop. The small space filled with tiny tools and quiet dedication. The way his hands moved with precision over mechanisms most people found impossibly intricate. The lessons he had taught me about every small thing mattering. I told her about discovering the hidden empire after his death. The properties. The investments. The decades of careful building while everyone thought he was just a janitor who fixed watches. I told her about the letters. The protection he had prepared. The way he had watched my marriage and known the truth long before I did. And I told her about the courtroom. The moment when everything Vivian had built on deception came crashing down around her. The letter Walter had read aloud. The quiet justice of a father's love reaching across death to protect his son. When I finished, Claire was quiet for a long moment. He sounds extraordinary, she finally said. Not because of the money or the buildings. Because he loved you enough to let you struggle so you could become strong. And then protected you when you finally needed it. That is exactly what he did. My father was similar in some ways. Not wealthy, but wise. He taught me that the value of work is not in what other people see. It is in what you know to be true about what you have made. I reached across the table and took her hand. I would like to see one of your restoration projects sometime. If you would not mind showing me. Her smile lit up her entire face. I would like that very much. Summer arrived with long days and warm light. I was finishing a commission for a couple celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary. Their children had hired me to create a chest where they could store family photographs and documents. Something that would last for generations. Claire was there, watching me work on the final details. She had become a regular presence in the workshop over the past months. Sometimes helping. Sometimes just keeping me company. Always seeing the work clearly and appreciating what I was trying to accomplish. The dovetails on the corners, she said. How long did they take? About 2 days. Each one cut and fitted by hand. Most people would not notice the difference between hand cut and machine cut. No. But the couple who receives this will know. And their children will know. And maybe their grandchildren will look at these joints someday and understand that someone took real time and care to make this piece. Claire walked around the chest, examining it from different angles. Your father would be proud of this. I think so too. She stopped at the back corner where I had inlaid a small design in contrasting wood. A pocket watch. The same symbol my father had used as his personal seal. Is that for him? Every piece I make has one. Usually hidden somewhere that only someone really looking would find. A way of carrying him forward. Claire touched the inlay gently. That is beautiful, Raymond. The work and the meaning behind it. I set down my tools and turned to face her fully. There is something I want to tell you. She waited. I spent 11 years in a marriage where I was constantly made to feel like I was not enough. Like my interests were trivial and my contributions were worthless. I believed it for so long that I forgot who I was. Claire nodded but did not interrupt. Being with you is different. You see my work and understand why it matters. You ask questions because you actually want to know the answers. You never make me feel like I need to be someone other than who I am. Raymond. I do not know what this is between us yet. Where it is going. What it might become. But I wanted you to know that you are helping me remember who I was supposed to be all along. And I am grateful for that. Claire stepped closer. I spent years rebuilding old houses before I understood that I was also rebuilding myself. Every restoration project taught me something about patience and care and the value of what remains when you strip away everything that does not belong. She took my hand. You are not a project, Raymond. But watching you work, seeing how much love you put into every piece you make, has helped me understand something. The right person does not need you to be different. They just need you to be present. The afternoon light slanted through the workshop windows, casting everything in gold. My father wrote that kindness is not weakness, I said. That it is something only strong people can maintain in a world that rewards cruelty. Claire smiled. He was right. And you prove it every day. The second anniversary of the courthouse revelation arrived without fanfare. I spent the morning in the workshop as usual, then closed early and drove to the cemetery. The ritual had become important to me, a way of staying connected to my father even as life moved forward. The oak trees were heavy with summer foliage. Cicadas sang their endless song in the warm air. I sat on the grass beside his headstone and felt the peace that always came in this place. 2 years, Dad. Hard to believe how much has changed. I told him about Claire, about the business continuing to grow, about Catherine announcing she was engaged to a man who seemed genuinely good and kind. I told him about seeing Vivian once, from a distance, at a restaurant downtown. She had been with people I did not recognize, laughing at something someone said. She looked thinner but not unhappy. Rebuilding, as people do. I thought I would feel something when I saw her. Anger maybe. Or satisfaction at how far she had fallen. But I just felt neutral. Like looking at someone I used to know a long time ago. A butterfly landed on the grass near my knee and rested there for a moment before moving on. I understand now what you meant about kindness not being weakness. I spent so many years thinking that being gentle meant being vulnerable. That protecting myself required becoming harder and more guarded. But that is not true. The strength is in staying open even when people have hurt you. In continuing to care about doing things properly even when shortcuts would be easier. In refusing to let other people's cruelty change who you fundamentally are. The butterfly had gone, but a small beetle was making its way across the grass toward the headstone. Vivian tried to make me smaller. And for a while she succeeded. But she could not make me into someone who did not care about quality and meaning and purpose. That was always there underneath everything she tried to strip away. And when I finally had the resources to fight back, I did not become cruel. I did not seek her destruction. I just asked for the truth to matter. For consequences to follow from choices. For things to be what they actually were rather than what she pretended them to be. I placed my hand on the warm stone. That is your inheritance, Dad. Not the buildings or the money. The understanding that character matters more than circumstances. That patience outlasts aggression. That small things done well accumulate into lives worth living. I stayed until the shadows lengthened, then walked back to my car. Claire was waiting at my apartment when I arrived. She had let herself in with the key I had given her last month. The smell of cooking filled the small space. Something with garlic and herbs. Comfortable and welcoming. How was your visit? She asked as I came through the door. Good. Peaceful. I told him about us. What did he say? He approved. I could tell. Claire smiled and handed me a glass of wine. To your father then. And to the people who love us enough to protect us even when they are gone. We touched glasses. And to the people who help us remember who we were supposed to be all along, I added. Claire leaned against me as we stood in the small kitchen, watching the evening light change outside the window. What do you want to do tonight? She asked. I thought for a moment. Nothing special. Dinner. Maybe a walk. Sitting together and talking about our days. She laughed softly. That sounds perfect. And it was. The story does not end with grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. It ends with quiet evenings in a workshop that smells of sawdust and wood polish. With furniture made slowly and carefully, each piece carrying forward the values my father taught me. With a woman who sees me clearly and loves what she sees. Vivian built an empire on manipulation and deception. It crumbled when the truth came to light. She rebuilt, as people do, but never regained what she had lost. The last I heard, she had moved to another city. Starting over with people who did not know her history. I built something different. Not an empire. Just a life. A small workshop where good work happens. A relationship with someone who values kindness rather than seeing it as weakness. A connection to my father that deepens every year instead of fading. He wrote that I was his greatest investment. Not because of money or success, but because of who I was. For years I did not understand what he meant. I thought I needed to become something more than I was. Something bigger and more impressive. But he saw clearly what I could not. That the person I already was, the quiet craftsman who cared about doing things properly, was exactly who I needed to be. I just had to stop letting other people convince me otherwise. The furniture I make will outlast me. Each piece carries something of my attention and care into the future. Tables where families will gather. Chairs where people will rest. Chests where memories will be preserved. And in each one, hidden somewhere that only someone really looking would find, a small inlay of a pocket watch. A father's seal. A reminder that every small thing matters, and that kindness is never weakness when it comes from someone strong enough to choose it. The end.